Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. Tonight, Ambergris Mystery. Hello there. There are some rather common treasures that turn up from time to time to make stories, such as the man who started out to dig a well and struck oil that gushed into his backyard, or the fellow whose chicken struck gold and carried around a load of nuggets in their craws. But few stories that Grays Harbor has produced can compare to the Ambergris Mystery. Do you remember it? If you can turn the calendar back about 20 years and have a good head for facts, perhaps you can piece together the story of the stolen Ambergris, the court scene, the professional testimony, and the strange and anticlimactic ending. Oh, it was exciting all right while it lasted, and it turned the little town of Copalis upside down. Well, tonight we have opened our scrapbook to the page that tells the story of the Ambergris Mystery. And when George has taken the customary few seconds for our sponsor, we'll tell you about this tempest that started when 3 Grays Harbor men found a mysterious chunk of white grease on the sands of Copalis Beach. Right now, George, a word from our sponsor. It was April 1931. In Aberdeen, Hollis Flutes had resumed his duties as Secretary of the Chamber of Commerce. The Port Commissioner was trying to get the harbor dredged. Hoquiam's Mayor Shaw was having a war with the City Council over his city engineer and water superintendent. And down at Copalis Beach, the Martin brothers were hiking along the surf line at low tide. You know how the beaches look at low tide. A little driftwood, some old bits of flotsam and jetsam, and a few bits of old wreckage jut out of the sands. The Martin brothers, Henry, Kenneth, and M.R., weren't exactly beachcombing, but for that, what man can walk up a stretch of beach at low tide and not have his eyes out for something left over by the tide? That's why Henry's eye caught sight of a big chunk of something white lying along the beach where the surf had left it. And he went out of his way to walk towards it, kicked it gently with one toe, then felt it with his fingers. Kenneth and M.R. came over. When he stopped to examine it, they noted that it was greasy, smelled very odd, was a shapeless mass of something that none of them had ever could recall seeing on the beach before. It was Henry who finally volunteered an explanation. "Why, that's their stuff that comes out of a sick well," he said. That grease stuff. None of the 3 knew, but each had heard of something of the other that came out of a sick well that was worth money. Henry picked up the heavy chunk of greasy white stuff and continued on their way back to their cabin on the beach on Copalis. Henry was going to carry the white stuff into the cabin, but his brothers protested. It didn't smell good. Besides, it seemed to have melted when it got warm. Just the touch of the hand made it soft. Henry felt it under the tree, left it under the tree in the yard. That's where it was when Charlie Strawn came over a little later. The 4 men stood around the chunk of grease and talked about it. Charlie had a name for it. Ambergris, he called it. Of course, it probably ain't ambergris, he observed, but that there ambergris is worth a lot of dough. Charlie stooped down and cut a chunk the size of his fist off of one corner, wrapped it in a piece of paper, and observed that he'd take it to a guy who knew about such things. "Maybe you've got something there," he observed. That's how C.W. Strawn happened to pay a visit to Victor Street in Aberdeen. Wells are something that most folks know a little about, and very little. Not being an animal whose habits are usually studied or frequently examined, the people of Grays Harbor could vouch for the proclivities of wells for very few. Vic Street was one. Vic had been in the whaling business. He had built the whaling station from New Brunswick to Port Borough. He operated the City Retail Lumber Company in Aberdeen, and his warehouse. Strawn laid out a chunk of white grease for Vic's examination. There are two kinds of ambergris, Vic said, borrowing from his storehouse of experience. One kind is white, very much like this. One kind is dark gray. The gray is worth about $10 an ounce. The white is worth from $15 to $30. I've taken lots of ambergris out of wells, Vic added, and there are simple tests to show whether it is or is not ambergris. Of course, the tests aren't certain. It takes specialists to tell you the real from the good fake. One test is to see if it will dissolve in alcohol. Vic got down a bottle of alcohol from the paint rack in the warehouse and poured some onto the lid of a coffee can. He dropped the tiny chip of the grease into the alcohol and it dissolved in less than a minute. Vic put a piece in water and it floated. "That's right," he said, "and it smells bad. That's like ambergris." "And if it's ambergris," Strawn said, "we'd better tell the Martin boys. They're greasing their boats with the stuff now." Vic grabbed for the table. "Greasing their boats with it at $30 an ounce? Tell them to bring that chunk of grease into me, and we'll send it to a buyer for some tests." Vic almost shouted, and Strawn disappeared. It was several days before the ambergris turned up in the news. The Martin brothers wanted to keep it quiet, but one day after a big chunk of the white stuff had been stowed in a secret place in their cabin, they took a trip with Strawn to the Capellas Crossing, and when they came back, the grease was gone. Then the sheriff got into the act. Henry Martin made a trip up to Montesano to report to the sheriff's criminal investigator, Shell Matthews. "Someone stole our ambergris," he reported, and named Strawn and Capellas resident David W. Black as suspects. "Strawn got us out of town and Black snitched the grease," he told the law officer. Warrants were sworn out for Black and Strawn. Strawn was picked up by the sheriff, and Black, hearing of the warrant, came into the Aberdeen police station and gave himself up. Both denied having stolen the ambergris trunk of white grease, but nevertheless it was gone. "The Martin brothers gave me a chunk of that to have tested," Strawn told the sheriff. "I took it to Vic Street in Aberdeen." When the sheriff went to Vic Street, the Aberdeen lumber dealer verified Strawn's story as far as he could. Yes, Strawn had brought in a chunk of the white stuff the size of his fist and had passed some of the elementary tests for ambergris, and Street had sent it to Harry and Albridge of New York dealers in whale products for test. If it was ambergris, they were commissioned to handle its sale. Street hadn't heard from them yet. But the big chunk, a 50-pound mother load of the Seashore Bonanza, was missing, and the Martin brothers demanded that the sheriff do something about it. So, in Justice Arthur Furnia's court in Montesano on April 11, 1931, Deputy Prosecutor Oscar Calinas hailed Strawn and Black before the bar of justice to charge them with having stolen the valuable find. One by one, the witness paraded before the justice. The sheriff testified that he had made the arrest at the request of the Martin brothers, who claimed that the white lump had been declared to be ambergris by a well specialist, Vic Street of Aberdeen. But frankly, the sheriff said he didn't know whether it was hunting for 50 pounds of ambergris or 50 pounds of sheep tallow. It was all the same to him. Capellas residents were called to the stand. Then Vic Street took the stand and exploded a bomb. Fumbling in his pocket, he produced a telegram from New York firm to whom he had sent the fragment of the big chunk. It stated, "Material not ambergris, probably just grease, valueless. Very sorry." The prosecutors protested. He sensed a major crime slipping out from between his fingers. When he called a witness, E.F. Schmidt, a Hoquiam chemist, Schmidt told them of his test. Everyone he asserted pointed to the big lump of white stuff as being genuine ambergris of the highest quality. Street's telegram didn't change his opinion. He was positive that it was ambergris. It didn't take Justice Frist long to hand down his decision. First, he said he was not sure that the missing lump was worth anything. Then he had the opinion that the evidence against Black and Strawn was purely circumstantial. No lump had been found in anyone's possession. No one had seen anyone do anything. No one had confessed to the theft, and therefore dismissal was in the case. Deputy Prosecutor Kalinas filed an information against the men in Superior Court to bring trial on grand larceny charges. Their bail was set at $5,000 each. By this time, all Grace Harbor was deep in the mystery of the missing ambergris, said to be worth more than $30,000. It was street corner conversation wherever Vic Street went. People asked him about the mysterious white stuff. A week passed, a week in which the prosecutor's office prepared to hail Black and Stern before the Superior Court charged with theft of a fortune in ambergris. The Henry brothers searched in vain for future fortunes from the Folsom and Jetsam. Grace Harbor worked itself into a fever pitch, and more than one family spent its time, there was plenty of time in 1931 for such activities, spent in the time of combing the beaches for white greasy lumps of ambergris. That's the way things were right up to the evening of the trial that the whole harbor was watching with interest. And then came the explosion. But right here, let's take our customary few words from George and our sponsors. Yes, on that evening of the trial, a letter was received by Victor Street from the New York chemist to whom Harvey and Outbridge had sent their first size sample of grease for analysis. Vic read it and hurried to the prosecutor's office. He thrust the letter under the nose of the DA, who read the professional term. The grease is definitely not ambergris. My test shows that it's mostly suet renderings, and it is probably cooking grease thrown over the side of a passing ship. There was no trial. True, the accused had not proven innocent, but the prosecutor hesitated to hail anyone into court for stealing a chunk of cooking grease. The Martin brothers refused to withdraw their charges, arguing that they knew it was ambergris. But the trial died by adjournment, and somehow Grace Harbor was disappointed, for 1931 was a slow year, and everyone hoped for some excitement. Besides, $30,000 in 1931 was like $1 million today, and people were in a state of mind to believe in miracles. But the great ambergris discovery made lots of news back in 1931 and left us all tonight with a smile on our face as we read it from our hometown scrapbook. Thank you for listening.